Well, good evening to everyone. Beautiful, beautiful spring evening in St. Louis, and I've got some of it in my notes here, so unfortunately. I'm John Eckridge, the chairman of the Engaging Faith and Culture Committee, presenting all these programs here over the next 2 years at Concordia. And we're really excited tonight in particular because we had the first of our cohorts at Washington University, Dr. Inazu, along with John Butterfield and Sommer from Lutheran South. I feel really blessed because I've been a graduate of both of those institutions, 1965 from Lutheran South, Lutheran South, and 1969 from Washington University. So I feel a special connection personally with all of what's going to go on tonight. What a wonderful topic we're going to have, kind of learning to disagree. And as I was thinking about this this past couple of weeks, it struck me that actually being a German Lutheran kid, like probably many of you, I grew up in my home and in my Lutheran school education, certainly, learning to agree. I mean, that was what it was all about. Learning to agree kind of with the will of my German Lutheran parents, but also, you know, theologically to learn doctrine and to follow a doctrine with which I was pleased to be able to agree by the power of the Holy Spirit, you know. So learning to disagree is almost an antithesis to at least my early education. I think at the time when I was at WashU, there were plenty of opportunities then to learn to disagree because of the cultural mix of people that I was exposed to. But just thinking about that, you might apply that into your own life as well. As many of you know, one of our dear committee members, sort of a founding committee member, Bob Boehmer, has passed this week, and there will be a celebration of life with him on the 25th, and keep looking for those announcements. But I was very fortunate to be with Bob, who's been my friend for over 60 years, and to be with he and his wife this Tuesday night before he passed. And the theme that was going on, even though Bob was in a coma, the theme that was going on with his family is in Christ there is the victory. And so for our opening song this evening, we're going to turn to the Gettys. The song was introduced to us this Easter here at Concordia. It may be unfamiliar to you, so kind of just jump in wherever you feel comfortable. But let's kind of sing this with Bob's faith and Bob's resurrection in mind, along with all of us up there.
Well, it's my honor to introduce another member of our committee who has done a tremendous amount of work for putting not only tonight on, but especially all of our questionnaires and lots of the contacts that we had. And she's going to introduce our distinguished speakers. Christy Hayner.
Thank you. All right, so if you all want to come up here and stand, I'll introduce you all. So I'm Christy Hayner, and I have the privilege of inviting these folks here, our honorable guests. The way I found out about them was my daughter goes to Lutheran South, and I saw a promotion about this interview that they did at Lutheran South, and when I read about it, I thought, oh, we have to have them come here for our speaker engagement series because this is a perfect topic. So let me first start by introducing John Inazu. He is the Sally D. Danforth Distinguished Professor of Law and Religion at WashU. His scholarship focuses on First Amendment freedoms of speech, assembly, and religion, and related questions of legal and political theory. He has written several books, with his most recent book, which is the focus of tonight, entitled Learning to Disagree, The Surprising Path to Navigating Differences with Empathy and Respect. I just recently read the book, and I have to say one of my favorite quotes from the book is, "Sometimes a drop of empathy can restrain a flood of needless words and thoughtless commentary." So his articles have appeared in a number of Associate General Counsel with the Department of the Air Force at the Pentagon. He's also founder of the Carver Project, which empowers Christian faculty and students at WashU to serve and connect university, church, and society. If you haven't heard, Concordia Berkeley here is one of the Carver Project's church partners, so we hope to learn more about what the Carver Project is tonight. We're also honored to have with us Dr. Butterfield, who's the head of school at Lutheran South, and Pastor Sommer, who's the school chaplain at Lutheran South, and both have a wealth of experience in church and school ministry and education, and they will be interviewing someone else tonight, just as they did at Lutheran South. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mics over to you all, assuming you have your mics, and we're looking forward to hearing the conversation.
All right, very good. Well, thank you for hosting, Concordia. Thank you, Dr. Eckridge. And thank you, John, for being here. This is our third time. I mean, I don't know if you remember this, so let me just set the stage here, how we met. My wife works at WashU, and one day she emails me shortly after she's there, and she said, there was something that you had written about, at the time, confident pluralism, like 2 or 3 books ago. And she emails me and said, I think there's another Christian here. And so I read the book, and I loved it, and I emailed you, and you were so kind as you, like, within a day, replied back. I'm like, who is this guy? And then you informed me of the Carver Project. And so we had a meal. And so just for the group here, tell us about the Carver Project a little bit.
Yeah, first of all, it's great to be here. It's great to be back with these guys. We could do a road show right now. And thank you for being here. So the Carver Project is a ministry I founded at WashU about 8 years ago. And the mission is to empower Christian faculty and students to serve and connect university, church, and society. And I'll just say that part of that vision 8 years ago was this kind of thing. So I'm really grateful for your work to make this possible. The idea and the thought was that in places like St. Louis, you've got very important institutions like WashU and very important institutions like healthy local churches, and there's often a mutual distrust of each other. And that Christian faculty who both love WashU for all of its warts and challenges and love and are invested in the local churches can be bridges between those institutions. So we now have 45 full-time faculty at WashU in every school and most departments who are part of our ministry fellowship. A lot of us host students in our houses. I have a group of law students, about 20 law students, that comes to my house once a month to talk about Christianity and law. And we've got those groups in medicine and business and art and English around the university. We've got our faculty who come together for an annual retreat and monthly meetings. And then we partner with churches in the area like this one. And part of that early vision was, maybe wouldn't it be great if we could get faculty who have some expertise on certain topics, but they could come in and sort of engage with local churches. And so I know the coming lineup here has a number of my friends and colleagues who can speak wonderfully about topics I know nothing about. So I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for partnering with the Carver Project, and thanks for making this possible.
Yeah, we scheduled this more than a year ago. Suddenly here we are. Now, before we get into the books, plural, just let me ask you, since we scheduled this, you've taken a kid to college.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
How are you different on the other side of just taking a kid to college? I mean, either you the person, you the spouse, you the parent, you the Christian. How did that,
I said you could ask me anything, but this is going to be a gut-wrenching question. It's a great question. We've loved it. So my oldest is a freshman at Wake Forest, and she's just launched really well. And that's been rewarding. I guess the other thing that I didn't expect, because when we were in college, you got on the phone, and you had to pay a long-distance charge. And you called home maybe once a week. So my parents had no clue. They didn't know what my classes were. They didn't know my friends. And Lauren texts us, all day long and tells us everything going on and sends us her proposed course schedule. So I feel like I'm kind of living, not in a clingy way, but just in I want to relate to you guys way. And that's been great. A big surprise. It's been a lot of fun. She's coming home. Today's Thursday. She's coming home tomorrow night. So I'm excited to see her for a couple days.
Don't expect the same thing from your son. Just warning you right now.
Yes, I've heard that before.
So, Dr. Butterfield, the other Dr. John.
Yeah, I brought the book tonight. I don't know if any of you have it or if you read it, Learning to Disagree. This is my second copy because the first time I read it, it was so good I gave it away, and I can't remember who I gave it to. So I bought it again to read it again a couple times before tonight. So thank you for your work on this book. You wrote several books. You've written several books, as we discussed. The prior one was with Tim Keller, right? You co-authored with Tim Keller in 2020, I believe, or so. But this book from 2024, Learning to Disagree. Start with maybe an easy question. Why is this so relevant, maybe especially today in our society?
Yeah, well, it's relevant in a new way in 2026, maybe when I was writing it in earlier. And I think the original impetus for me writing this particular book was it was the middle of COVID, and I was we were all going crazy by ourselves, distanced and everything. And I was also just watching online the vitriol. It almost didn't matter what your position was. It was just whatever you believed, the other side was evil, and the other side was destroying the country. And as the rhetoric ratcheted up, I was thinking, when this fever breaks, we're going to need different ways to communicate, to think about what it means to be a common political society where we're going to have deep disagreements that lead to actual policy disagreements too, but we still have friends, neighbors, coworkers who we've got to do life together with. So that was sort of the first intuition or motivation for the book.
When you came to the school, I made an offer to, these are high schoolers. This is a testament to how accessible it is. I had probably 30, my offer to them was, if you want a copy, I'll buy you a copy. And I did. So I probably bought 30 copies.
These guys, by the way, are great salesmen for the book, so thank you.
Yeah, no, but I actually, I've read it a few times, but I listened to the audiobook a couple of times. How was that process? Did you hate that or like that?
Oh, it was fun
the
because
audiobook.
I could, because you can only tell your own jokes a certain way, right? If they outsourced it, they wouldn't get it quite right. So it was kind of exhausting because it's and by the way, like the reading of an audiobook in two or 3 years, no one's going to do it because it'll all be AI. But for now, at least, I was in a little recording studio and they had a producer piped in from New York or somewhere, and you just read for a day, another day, and you've got cough drops and honey tea and everything just to get through it. But it was a lot of fun.
I don't know if I'll do the AI thing, because I'll only listen to an audiobook if the author reads it, for the exact reason you described.
This is the problem, is you're not going to know. Yeah. I mean, they told me, this is maybe inside baseball, but they said usually when the author reads an audiobook, we schedule a day about a month later for pickups, basically to fix everything if you screwed up a line or something. But when we finished my session, they said, to be honest, we've got enough of your voice that we can fill in anything with AI at this point. So.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So
that's scary.
Ready for the next book, not written by me.
As an educator, I can tell you that I enjoy the layout of your book. You don't use chapters. You divide up your topics by months of the school year, right? And so very fittingly, your August topic is empathy. Right, and you rightly encourage people to have empathy as educators, professors, maybe a special level of empathy in August, that first day of class, where you're like, boy, I got to learn to love these kids. We'll see. We're gonna have a long semester together, but you rightly encourage it. So, in your own words, how do you define empathy? And maybe a bonus question: can you empathize with someone you don't like or respect?
Right. So, second question, yes, and then we have to. I think of empathy in kind of very simplistically as trying as much as you can to put yourself in someone else's shoes, and at the same time realizing that there are absolutely limits to that exercise. So our social problem right now is some people don't try, and they just don't care what other people are going through, and some people over-identify, and they think and say, oh, I know exactly how you feel, as someone who's not at all like me and who's been raised completely differently from me, and neither of those is healthy or human. So empathy is the effort to try, while recognizing limits, to identify with why would someone else think so differently than I might about a hard issue or an eternal question or something like that.
In the chapter, the first chapter, there's a quote from, you said, if we don't pay attention, we're going to find algorithms reflecting our worst impulses, and they'll condition us toward animosity rather than empathy, right? So give us some advice on how to use social media well. We're going to use AI and, it's a thing, right?
Yeah.
How do we steward this well and not let it generate in us, and we'll talk about this later, just, hate and vitriol, rather.
I think the honest answer is we are going to have to take some very radical steps, because we are not, for us, for our kids, people we teach, we're just not going to outsmart the algorithms, and the algorithms are driven by extreme money interests, and they're reflective of our own. It's all about sort of dopamine and revealed preferences and everything else, and we've shown the machine what we want, and it's not pretty. So we have to kind of do a big break and have practices and rhythms to get away from it. And I'm on sort of some social media, and I find myself checking myself all the time. Like I should not be doing this, or this is not a credible source. And so if you're going to stay on it, at least diversify as much as possible to get some different feeds. But I think the real answer is think about taking some hard steps to set real and concrete boundaries. And here I think, there's a lot of Christianity that makes sense not just because it's true, but because it's practical. So Sabbath rhythms are really good advice, and if you can, I try to take a day a week, not just of Sabbath, but offline completely. Okay. And it creates a rhythm in my life where there's a break from some of the nonsense.
This is off topic, well, related, but I remember from the book, I think you said even during your vacations, you guys didn't use your cell phones at all, right?
So my friend Andy Crouch gave this advice, and we've adopted it for the last 6 or 7 years as a family. And I think not everyone, this is not workable in every career and every job, but some of us have jobs where with enough advanced planning, you can actually coordinate to take an entire week, go dark for a week. So our family rhythm.
Or go light, depending on how you look at it.
Right. Yeah. Our family rhythm is we go to this sleepy beach town in North Carolina, and everybody is completely offline for a week. And in my job, that it usually, for whatever reason, it usually coincides with the U.S. Supreme Court releasing its most important opinions of the term, which I then miss. And and so actually it's a useful exercise in my own relative irrelevance, because in the period leading up to that, I'll sometimes get calls from reporters saying, the Supreme Court intends, or we think it's going to issue its opinion on this day, and can you be on standby for an interview if it does? And so I line that all up, and then I'm at the beach, and the big case on law and religion drops, and I have no idea, and they call other people, and I'm just on the beach with my kids, and then I look the next week and realize, I missed all that, and it turns out nobody cared what I thought. Nobody missed me, and I just got this week of a break. And it's not fun I like people to listen to what I say and write, but it's also a good reminder that most of what we do in a cosmic sense just doesn't matter. Like, we are participants in a grand plan, and what a privilege, but we're just bit players, and that's, I think getting offline can be a reminder of that.
Let me pull out a quote from this chapter as well. So you're an attorney, and now you're a law professor, and you wrote in your book that empathy in the courtroom can be applied to everyday disagreements. And you wrote this quote: "Find out what motivates them, examine how their arguments get off the ground, ask why the conclusions that seem so obviously correct to you seem so obviously wrong to them." Right? Why isn't that the norm? That's not the norm today, right?
Right, and not even the norm in law school anymore either, which is why the challenge is so acute. As you were reading that quote, I was thinking this morning, I'm teaching first-year law students Introduction to Criminal Law. This morning was the use of force by law enforcement. Not an uncontroversial topic. I know you're still a chaplain?
Yes, sir.
With the police department. And hard issues on both sides, and some people really dug into an absolute sense of right or wrong, and the idea that you might actually, well, first, the beauty of law is you can start with a text, what does the statute, what does the Missouri statute say about this, and how does that situate our disagreement? And then you can talk about perspectives and why someone might have a very different view of the policy underlying it, or why someone's past experience might have them view police differently. And so we're doing this morning in this class of 92 students from really all around not just the country, but the world, and trying to have them process what was the shooting of Michael Brown by Darren Wilson like, and how do we analyze that through this complex array of law and policy and St. Louis. And you can't do that without that kind of work and that kind of effort. And I think, I mean, if I'm doing my job right, I'm helping to train lawyers to do that well as a professional skill, but it's also just a human skill that you can employ when you're at Thanksgiving or wherever it is, where you're just not able intuitively to see why that other perspective gets off the ground.
Before I get to my question, though, one thing that I remember from the book, as you talk about, like whether it's Michael Brown or any other, it never occurred to me till I read the book that any verdict is just a best attempt at restoring the thing.
Right.
You know, you never actually, you know, if you cause a car accident and I'm disabled on the other side of it, no payment. It's not actually, I'm not actually getting fully restored. It's just the best we can do. And it didn't, I know that sounds ridiculous, but it never occurred to me the gravity of that you don't get fully restored. These are, the court system is just a best attempt at
and we
justice.
all, this is actually, I think it's a nice little apologetic because you can actually talk to anyone, and we all have this innate sense of this desire for justice.
Yeah.
This is hot on my mind because I spent this afternoon at the Richmond Heights Police Department because I got sideswiped in a parking lot, hit and run, but they got it on tape, and so, you know, I'm going to be able to track down with a license plate whoever this was, and I want my justice for the damage to my car. But in fact, and then we all do this, right? And the little things and the big things, and we see a wrong in the world or a breach or an abuse of power, and we want that wrong righted, and then when we actually think about it in a very human sense, especially for the harder things, there's not going to be a full justice that remedies the injustice. You know, if you've been deeply harmed by a human being, there's nothing that person can do to restore everything. So we have available, as Christians, we have forgiveness and grace and redemption and these sorts of things, but in a worldly sense, we have a very imperfect but very important system of law that is a proxy for justice. And sometimes that law gets close, and sometimes because the law is comprised of human actors, they get it wrong. They indict when they shouldn't have, or the other way around, or the judgment is off, or the appeal misses an issue. And so we sit back and look at this, and I think any sort of person who examines it with scrutiny realizes there's a lot of gray and a lot of missteps, and also how grateful we are to have a system rather than not a system, because the alternative is very, very bleak.
All right, I'll do a hard pivot. In September, there's a quote, and I like this line, but I want you to share it with folks. You say, don't be a First Amendment hero. Right? Well, what do you mean by that? I mean, First Amendment is a good thing, right? Wouldn't I want to be a First Amendment hero?
Well, I make my living on the First Amendment, so I think it is a good thing. In context, what I'm trying to tell students is there are some people that come to law school and think, I'm going to use this opportunity to push the limits and make my point by saying the loudest, most obnoxious, most controversial point I can, because that's my right, and these people have to hear it. And what I try to tell the students is, well, first of all, play the long game, and the people sitting next to you in law school are going to be your professional colleagues for the rest of your life, and your reputation is going to matter. And if your reputation is you're the obnoxious person trying to stir the pot, that's not going to go well for you. But also, it rarely is effective at persuasion. So I think if the goal is really to persuade, then you want to start with the most plausible mode of engagement, which is rarely going to be the over-the-top rhetoric. And I remember I was speaking at it was a public school, a college, somewhere in Virginia, I forget which one, and I was doing a talk, this was 8 or 9 years ago, on First Amendment sorts of things, and we went to the Q&A, and it's the only time I think it's the only time this has happened to me. The Q&A was rigged, so the members of one student group had all planned, as soon as we went to the Q&A, they're going to line up with the microphone. And they, one by one, kind of berated me with their questions. And in this case, the group was, I think, a conservative political student group, and they were saying, you know, this is what happened. You know, we just had an event, and we put up these super controversial flyers all over campus, and people tore them down, and don't you think we have a First Amendment right to do that? And so I said, like, of course I'm going to defend your First Amendment right at a public university to do what you want, but was it, like, if you actually care about trying to persuade people of your opinion, that was a really dumb way to try to reach your fellow classmates. And so just the sense that, like, just because you can do something legally or culturally, whatever, doesn't mean you should. And this idea of prudence or discernment or context can matter a great deal, even just pragmatically for the ends that you want to achieve.
I don't think anybody here is planning that tonight for the Q&A. Just, so you know,
We'll
just to put
see,
you at ease, just to calm
I've
you
also
down.
been spontaneously protested, so if all of you stand up at the same time, I'm walking out.
In your chapter on October, which is titled, What Happens When We Can't Compromise? I appreciate your reference to a necessary soft skill of professors. You call it the brisk walk, right? Where you're not breaking a sweat, but you're also not ready to, engage in small talk conversations on campus. I think I'm guilty of that
Yeah,
in school.
that's him, by the way.
Right, like I'm going somewhere I don't have time, but here's what, I think this is my favorite quote. You heard Christy's favorite quote. I think this is mine. You said when you wrote that you find yourself at the brisk walk pace with your family, you wrote something that struck me as profound. You said, efficiency and presence are sometimes mutually exclusive. Efficiency and presence are sometimes mutually exclusive. And it was sort of written as a side, but it does impact the art of disagreeing too, doesn't it?
Absolutely. But I want to start with the reference to family, because I think what that reflection came out of was I travel a ton speaking and going to different places. I love to travel by myself. I am less excited about travel with my family because it's just far less efficient in the airports. And I've got my own rhythms down that really work for me. And when you add 4 to that, that doesn't work. And so I was one time walking very quickly, not realizing I was ahead of my entire family in the terminal, and then my middle daughter got up to me and just said, "Why are you like this?" So the roles and the rhythms that you can play in some contexts don't work in others. And then in the context of disagreement, the idea that I think that you want to start with just counting the costs and recognize that other human beings, if you really care about them, it's going to take time, it's going to take presence. I mean, if you're thinking of a friend or a family member and you just know that whatever that issue is, that it's just hurting the relationship or the friendship, there's almost no chance you're going to figure that out over like a cup of coffee. It's going to be a long-term relational effort with many discussions, and sometimes those discussions have to back up and start with just very ordinary things of reestablishing trust in a relationship before you can get to the hard topic. And if you're not present in that, or if you're just trying to get through it or move on to the next thing, odds are it's not going to work out very well.
That same chapter, in this world, culture presents us with a lot of false dichotomies, right? And I love Keller, by the way. He talks about these ethical bundles that politics create. But there are real dichotomies, like when I go to vote, I can't pick and choose, sadly, the best from these candidates or this thing and the best from here. And I know some folks who say that their answer is, well, I just don't vote, right? I'm just not gonna vote. Why is that not the preferred, or is that the preferred thing, to just not engage? When you're faced with, kind of the lesser of two evils?
I mean, I think that's a really hard question, I think, for Christians. Individual and communal discernment matters here. I don't think there's a right answer to that question. I mean, I
wasn't implying there was.
Yeah,
right?
no,
Yeah,
I didn't think you were either, but I do think I have very good friends who are quite involved in both national political parties, and I have very good friends who don't vote. So, and all of them are faithful Christians who are trying their best in the political context that they have discerned to do this work. And I think the only sort of maybe advice across the board is wherever you land on that, make sure you're not selling your soul to the thing. And you can only do that by surrounding yourself with a community of truth tellers who know you and who know what you're trying to do in the world. And absent that community, it's very likely that you will be eaten up by the temptations and the rhetoric.
You wrote a passage in your book about what you learned about having difficult conversations when you watched your dad die. And what did you learn about saying things more gracefully than maybe you did in the past?
Yeah, so this was hard. I mean, my dad died 6 years ago of lung cancer, and he was diagnosed a year before he died. my parents lived in Colorado Springs. I'm here in St. Louis. There are no direct flights. So that year was just a lot of flying back to spend as much time as possible. And in the year prior, we'd had one of these disagreements over political issues and political and like how, all the dumb stuff that kids and parents and grandkids always fight about, like, why are you parenting your kids this way? But whatever it was, we stopped talking for a year. And then the next time I heard from them was my mom calling to say, he's been diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. And so I think we both at that time just made this commitment that, when you know that time is short, it really does change your perspective on things. And so we talked a little more honestly, but a little more gracefully. And I think we're just able to connect on a deeper level and, reconcile some. And the other thing too is, some of you have also experienced this, but when you watch your parent die, it's very hard to describe anything else in life like this, because this is the person who, who in many cases you saw as the adult or the mentor or the guide, and now you're experiencing this process of decay and decline, and that's it makes you think differently about life and how you engage with people.
And how you engage with your own kid, everything, right? As somebody, you just, when you're suddenly, you realize, like, I'm the next,
That's right.
I'm looking at time too, and I'm like, there's so many questions here. I'm gonna jump to December here.
We had a hard time deciding what questions.
Yeah. So Dr. Butterfield,
I think this is half of them.
I might jump around here. Okay, I'm gonna jump to February because I think it's more to the point of learning to disagree. You wrote this: once you've realized how much of the world is non-neutral, right? How much of it's up for grabs, it's natural to want to just argue for your point of view. But recognizing that, this is your words, right? Recognizing a lack of neutrality doesn't mean embracing a lack of nuance, right? So what's the difference between a lack of neutrality, right, and a lack of nuance? What's the difference between?
Yeah, so I always tell my students in every class I teach, I say, the one thing I want you to know is there's nothing neutral about this class. I picked the syllabus, I picked the books. I'm going to control the conversation that we're about to have, and I'll switch topics when I want to. There's nothing neutral here. And in fact, in addition to that, I'm trying to indoctrinate you. Not into my preferred politics, but I'm trying to indoctrinate, sticking to law students. I teach both law students and undergraduates, but I want law students to understand a way of thinking and a set of skills, and I want them to do this in a way that I think is the best and most effective way to practice law. So that's a form of indoctrination. And in fact, with my colleagues, we conspire to do this across the first year, especially for the first year law students. And I think to kind of pretend like we're doing something that's just detached and neutral, and we're just that's not what we're doing. And at the same time, I would be engaged in professional misconduct if I was trying to squeeze in or insert my own viewpoints about certain issues, or trying to get them to think just like I do about whatever, Christianity or politics or anything else. And so there is nuance in the way that you work hard to navigate your own biases and your own approach to things. And there's a care and a professionalism that can go with that as well. But it doesn't mean that we're doing anything neutral in the world. We're all formed and shaped by experiences and beliefs and relationships, and those collective set of inputs have us see the world in different ways and in different non-neutral ways.
But John, I can be objective.
You can, sure, of course, but you're the exception.
Yeah, right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'm taking you back to December because I like the title of the chapter. It says, can we see people instead of problems? I tried to listen to your voice as you asked that question. Right? You wrote that you try to remember in every encounter that everyone wants to be treated kindly rather than dismissively. That's great, but do you have any tips for how we don't forget that in everyday life.
Well, when you read that, I said, every encounter, really? Like, was I doing that with the Richmond police today? I don't know. No, I do think, so one very practical tip, and this is, I find myself doing this sometimes, but if there is somebody who is coming across your day, whether it's, a kind of a passing encounter with a service worker or someone, a neighbor or someone, your first instinct is, I don't have time for this person, or I don't really like this person, just to kind of very quickly tell yourself, image bearer. This person is someone created by God, who's created in the image of God, and that should reset who is in front of me. And I actually find that, as I look back in my own life, sometimes it is these very random and, to me, forgettable conversations where someone comes back a few years later and says, you know what, that conversation we had, and I just think, I don't remember the conversation at all, but it's the attentiveness and just kind of a willingness to recognize that, too, God is working in ways that are far bigger than we think, and he can often use very modest efforts on our part of just presence and work in ways that we are not controlling.
Sometimes we don't just not see people as image bearers, but we take them into the category of evil, right? And not just wrong, but evil. And you wrote this, and this was, by the way, you've got a Substack, right? So you can subscribe to, like, you don't have to wait for the next book to come out. You put out, some content every couple weeks via Substack. And a couple weeks ago, you wrote this. You said, when you expend your rhetorical firepower on hyperbole and overgeneralizations, like calling somebody evil or blah, 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 right? You said, if you do that, you're not going to have anything left to confront the people who come much closer to actually embodying the labels you've been using. That was great. So here's my question to you. How does recharacterizing something as wrong as opposed to evil, how does it change how you think about the issue or how you think about the people? What's the difference there for you?
Yeah, so I think, one of the things we do as Christians, we have to acknowledge the reality of evil in the world, right? That's just kind of a basic core theological point. And there are evil doers in the world. They're still image bearers, but they can be evil doers, and it's a hard one sometimes to reconcile. And so we can start by thinking, well, who is in that evil category? And for the free spot on the bingo card, we can say the Nazis are evil. But I think our tendency, especially these days in politics, is we want to put a lot more of our opponents into that evil bucket. And one way to check ourselves is to say, really? Like the Nazis and whatever category of person you think it's as just an intellectual thought experiment, it usually is going to fall apart. And so then you can say, okay, this person might be pursuing a policy or a politics that I find is deeply harmful to society and is resulting in pain and suffering that I want to see stopped. And in fact, I might want to do everything in my power to stop it. And yet, this is a complex human being who is more nuanced than I think, who also probably eats lunch and watches movies and has kids or whatever it is. You can recognize it in most of life's conflicts. The person on the other side is not the pure embodiment of evil, but someone with whom you actually share quite a lot of common ground, and then, for various reasons, come differently at issues that matter tremendously and that you should fight for within an appropriate process and procedure. And often the hardest battles are going to require a very long game of social change in a certain direction or something like that. But all of that, I think, depends on keeping the evil out of the totality of the person that you see in front of you.
Image bearer.
So maybe in a similar vein, let me ask you about difficult conversations. How do you draw the line between a difficult conversation and those conversations you're not willing to have, or maybe even should not have? To what extent do you think you should engage with those who hold different worldviews than you do?
Yeah, I think this is a matter of discernment and temperament and availability and time, and kind of ask yourself and pray about it and ask other people. But I do think it goes back to counting the costs and the relationships that you have. We're finite human beings, and we only have so much time and so much relational capacity. So sometimes for some of us, that's going to mean you got to have that hard conversation for the rest of your life with someone who might not ever come around, but you're called to that relationship. And for other people, I actually have no time in this relationship. I was, one of my own personal struggles I get a lot of sort of, you are the exception. I was glad to have coffee with you. I do sometimes, just get a steady stream of people emailing and saying, can we get together to talk about X, Y, or Z? And early on in my career, I would just say yes no matter what, until I realized that all of those meetings were adding up to the, I also needed to see my family and teach my classes and so forth. And so sometimes at this point, I will just say, no, I'm sorry, in fact, never. Like, we will not meet for coffee ever. And that's a very hard thing to say. I say it much more nicely. As a pastor,
that's killing me.
I say it much more nicely than that, but it's kind of a reality of our own finitude and a recognition that actually God doesn't need us to solve everyone's immediate needs. And I think actually my impulse to say yes to every single person was actually probably some of my own pride, thinking like, oh, you know what, I'm certainly the person for this conversation and the next one and the next one. And sometimes that's true and sometimes it's not, and discernment comes into this.
You wrote difficult conversations are not cost-free.
Yeah.
Right? That's sort of what you're talking about.
For sure, yeah. And well, so I was talking about just the zero-sum costs of if 48 cups of coffee in a day is, not that I was doing that, but there's only so much time in the day, but also there's a relational cost and emotional cost. With the hardest conversations, you kind of have to prep yourself in advance. Make sure you had something to eat and gotten a good night's sleep, because these can drain you and they can take more time and more headspace than you might otherwise imagine.
I like that. I heard that, though. He said, no, we're never going to have that conversations. I'm going to use that one at school.
Yeah.
No and never, Chris.
But I'm the exception. We've established that.
Love it.
All right, I'm going to, just for time's sake, I'm going to jump, Dr. Butterfield, just so you know, I'm going to jump down to the closing, some of our final questions here. Just so you know, you got a podcast, right, that you just started.
Let me say something about this podcast, because it's super weird in my own life. So I read a guy's book. I really liked the book, invited him to a conference, and he came to the conference and then said, I'm an atheist, you're a Christian, we should do a podcast together. I don't know the guy at all at the time, and I'm thinking the last thing I need is something else to do. But he was very persuasive and kept at it. So we started this podcast, and that's kind of the idea. He's an atheist, I'm a Christian. You're
both legal professors.
We are, yeah, we're both professors, and we're both lawyers, but we don't know each other, and we have very different views of things. So we're trying to just talk this out on the podcast. And I don't know, I'd give it a B- right now. Maybe it's going to work, maybe it's not. But anyway, so that's the podcast.
I'm enjoying it because the whole premise is you're trying to embody what you're talking about, learning to disagree, right? I mean, and so, well, aren't we all? I mean, nobody's going to do it perfectly. I mean, you're just trying to be faithful, like we all are. So, what has been the hardest part about it? Is it being here? We're having a conversation, but it's not personal. We can be vulnerable, but not really, because there's 60 people out there. I mean, you're trying to create a friendship, but is it gimmicky or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. I mean, I will say one of the things that makes this feel more authentic and less performative is I know you, right? And we've spent some time together. So this isn't fly in and shake hands and walk up here and start talking. So there's some history that actually situates a conversation, and that's important. This podcast lacks that, so it does feel riskier in that sense. And I also, I just don't know, because we're trying to, it's a very individual, personal conversation, and we're trying to figure each other out, and I just don't know where I'm going to step next, or where he's going to step. And I'm usually pretty careful in how I'm thinking and speaking publicly, but it's difficult to do that in a very intense and deliberate relational context.
By the way, it's called cross-examined, right? If I didn't say that, forgive me. So.
I'm going to ask about forgiveness.
Okay.
Yeah. When you're near the end of your school year, April, is forgiveness possible, you write about. You wrote this: our capacity to forgive depends in part on our capacity to see ourselves both in need of forgiveness and able to be forgiven. And you want to say the very idea of forgiveness has become offensive to many people in our society. Right? Why do you think that's happened, and why is it so important that we flip that script?
Yeah, so I think you were asking me right before we came up here, did I have a sequence or a reason behind the ordering of these chapter themes? And I put forgiveness toward the end because it's one of the hardest questions to think about and embody. And I think so for Christians, of course, we know we are forgiven, we're in need of forgiveness, we're forgiven, and we're called to forgive. And I mean, that's just sort of basic to how we, not that we do it perfectly, but that's what we signed up for in Christianity. And in a lot of contexts, there has been a cultural background that has allowed that kind of theme to emerge and take hold of a social imagination, even when not everybody themselves are Christians. South Africa is probably the best, most historic example. Nelson Mandela is not a Christian, but he embodies and models this kind of forgiveness in a very powerful way, but made possible because a lot of the people watching that at least had some kind of background and exposure to Christianity. So I think it's actually a very live question right now. If you don't have the personal or social resources to be drawn to something as hard as forgiveness, then how do you pull it off in a society where there's sometimes less grace and more self-interest? And I think, when Tutu writes the book, No Future Without Forgiveness, he's making a political point that there is not going to be a future South Africa without the possibility of forgiveness. And I think we could say the same kind of claim here today in this country. If all we do, this goes back to also your earlier question about justice and harm. If all we do is keep fighting for justice or retributivism or whatever it is, we know we're gonna keep screwing it up, we're gonna keep hurting people and keep getting hurt, and then we're just gonna let that fester and build, and without something like forgiveness, that just goes in one direction only. And so I think there's a political necessity to this, but you can't just sort of demand forgiveness, you can't pronounce it, you have to practice and model it and hope for it, I think.
I think I'm robbing this from Keller, which his definition of forgiveness, I think, is to absorb relational debt. Right. And that's, it's not two-way. It's I just take it, the end. So
yes. And this reminds me, this is a little off topic, but it's fun, and it just came to mind. I've done a lot of thinking and some writing on forgiveness, and sometimes we just have to recognize that the world is a hard place. We're going to experience things that don't make sense, and thank God that there's God, and thank God for Easter, that world will one day be made right. But for a lot of us, there will just be moments of life that feel like incomplete and unresolved debts, either that we owe to people or that are owed to us. So the silly example that I actually wrote about after the book was, I was in the Austin airport and walking frantically to get my flight, and I was dressed in a suit and carrying a computer case and everything else, and there was a single blueberry on the floor of the Austin airport, and somehow I managed to hit the blueberry with my shoe and just go flying, and the bags went flying, and it was, the first thing I do is look up and I see over at the gate there's a group of fraternity guys just laughing hysterically at me, so it must have looked really uncoordinated, and then the Southwest person comes up to make sure I'm physically okay. And mostly, I was a little bruised, but I thought, I actually could have been very hurt. And then, this is the question, who is responsible for the sin of that blueberry, possibly really hurting my life? And the answer, of course, is we'll never know who negligently left the blueberry on the floor of the airport. And it's a silly example, but we could probably extrapolate or come up with others where the debt of that blueberry is going to remain unpaid and without justice for the rest of our lives. And
how big was this blueberry? That's all I'm thinking.
What was left of the blueberry looked like a very large blueberry to me.
All right, let me ask a question, and you can close us out with the last question. So let me say this before I ask my final question, which is, there's nobody whose work I respect more Nobody, right? Now, there's people whose work I respect as much, but there's nobody whose work I respect more than yours. And so one of the things that I want to thank you for the podcast, if for no other reason than this quote, okay? You were in a conversation with him, and you were talking about the difference between hope and optimism. And you said this, and I don't know if you've said this before, if it just kind of came out at the time. You said, because he was asking about, are you optimistic? And you said, no, but I have hope. And he said, what's the difference between hope and optimism? And you said, hope is not about things getting better. It's about them ending well. And I just thought, as a Christian, hope is, hope's not about things getting better. That's optimism, right? But hope is about them ending well. And so, I don't know, this is just me saying thank you for that, because it's just a great line that will wind up in a sermon someday. But what makes you hopeful in this moment, even if you're not optimistic? Because I think in the conversation, you said you weren't optimistic.
About a lot of things, yeah. I think there are a lot of things about which I'm not optimistic. But I think Christian hope is ultimately, I think my favorite verse in the Bible is 1 Corinthians, where Paul says, if it's just for this life that we have hope, then pity us beyond all people. But thanks be to God, Jesus is risen. And so that is the hope that frames everything. And, for us, we all have our ups and downs and our challenges. And throughout the ages and around the globe today, there are Christians who are struggling far more than most of us will ever imagine, and who are being persecuted in ways that often lead to, even today, right, torture and violent death. And most of us will not be called to face that kind of suffering in this world, and yet they proclaim this hope in what is finally to come. And so hope, I think, in things eternal, and hope in the story that ends in the fullness of time, where there is actually big J justice and no more tears and no more death. I think that's just a tremendous thing to think about. And when we can really embody that with each other, it doesn't necessarily change the way we feel in the day-to-day. I'm still going to wake up and complain about my arm tomorrow, but I can have a hope that transcends that.
Amen.
It would be a good way to end, but so if these people are like me, I'm reminded tonight about how many things at which I need to get better. Right, I'm so bad at so much of this stuff. So, and where do we start? What do you suggest to us? What can we do tomorrow to be better at these kind of things?
Well, I think, a couple of things that we talked about earlier tonight, but if you don't have people in your life who know you and who are truth tellers and who you have invited to speak truthfully into your life, then work on finding those people, because we so easily deceive ourselves. And you have to, it can't just be close friends. It has to be close friends who you have invited to say the hard things into your life. And those are not fun conversations, but I'm very grateful for a series of those conversations over my own life. So that'd be the first thing. And then the other thing is, I think if you are pessimistic about global or national things, start with what you can do locally to work on a relationship or make this region or the institutions you care about better, and play a very long game with those. Because I think the kinds of challenges that a lot of people experience today are not going to be solved in 6 months or a year. So one of the things I say to people, especially students, but really anyone, is, if you care about issue X, Y, or Z, give me your 10-year plan. And tell me, count the cost of what it's going to take, and start building institutions that are going to be healthy and vibrant in 10 years when we're still going to need them, and where people might be looking at things differently, and play that kind of a long game with the eternal hope that will motivate you through the ordinary times.
Thank you.
Thank you. I guess we'll turn it over now where Mrs. Hayner is to start taking some questions from the floor, unless you guys are planning to do a walkout. Was that an option?
That's right. Yeah, now everyone stand up and start chanting.
Yeah.
So we'll just open up to questions. Get started. Comments?
I guess my question anti this and you're pro,
Right.
how far down the rabbit hole do you go? Knowing that they're going to go example A, example B, example C, how far do you go?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question. And so first, if you're trying to practice this, start with something bite-sized or manageable. Don't start with, tell me why you voted for this person for president, right? That's going to be a very complex question. And then I think limit your focus, because this goes back to our finitude as human beings. We're actually not going to be able to learn all the things about all the things. So if you have, you could check your own, and we could all check our own intuitions. Do I actually have an informed view about this breaking political issue, or did I just get fired up because of some op-ed piece that I read, right? And am I willing to take the time to actually learn about the background of this issue, or really, so find a couple things you care about, read up on them, get informed enough to know how you might disagree. But I actually think probably the more practical thing for most of us is that we're learning more about how to be in relationship with someone than we are about how to navigate an actual intellectual topic. And that's going to be, the word learning is meant to imply this never-ending, ongoing task that we have in these relationships. And then for some of us, there will be, and this is important, we need experts, we need people who have thought deeply about certain issues, and we need really good arguments, especially about the tough issues. We want really good arguments in both directions so we can learn better and discern and, in some rare instances, persuade. But I think most of the hard issues, we're not actually going to persuade that person to change their mind, but we might learn how to come to a better understanding of disagreement across the relationship.
Can you have a dialogue without the relationship? A good, fruitful dialogue, or is relationship kind of almost required for it to be as successful as it needs to be?
You can always have a performative dialogue. I do this all the time, right? You go talk, you fly in somewhere, or you can even model nice civil disagreements, right? And this is kind of almost like a growth industry right now, where colleges and universities will bring in two people who disagree about an issue and have them talk for an hour in front of students, and then everyone claps and says we've done civil discourse. But it's not very costly, and it's not very genuine to most of our actual experiences.
And is it actually effective?
No, I don't think so. It models something at the margins. It models something,
okay.
And especially in a educational context, it's better than an alternative of nothing, or a completely one-sided viewpoint. But I find most of this, this is going to be ironic coming from me given the book I've written, but I find most of the civil discourse-y stuff in higher ed right now to be largely gimmicky and not very formational.
Okay.
And if you want to form people differently, put them in a seminar, or get them into a group of shared living experience with people who have to navigate different religious preferences or different ways of using the common kitchen or whatever it is. That's how you
put them on a podcast together, even though they don't know each other. For example,
yeah.
Theoretically.
I don't recommend that one. Yeah.
In regards to the no or never response, I'm thinking about the fact that I'm retired, and therefore I no longer consider it a privilege to be able to say no whenever I want and never. And so I find myself now having to seek out places to hear more disagreement or to be a part of discourse, civil discourse. So do you have any thoughts on, especially as older adults, where do you go and how do you learn?
Great. So I do think that, one underlying premise in your question was the self-awareness that time is different now at a certain stage in life, and you know what a privilege it is to be able to maybe seek out there's a challenge because you're maybe not in daily relationship, but also there's an opportunity with time. So that's a great initial recognition. And then I think, I mean, I think a church is a great place to start. I think one of the most untapped resources of Christianity in this country and local congregations specifically is that we aren't as engaged in our own institutional bodies, especially cross-generationally. And there's I think there's a very human reason for this. When I was a college student, I was part of this amazingly vibrant church in Durham, North Carolina. And as a college student, I would look at these families with young kids and retired folks, and I would think, I'm just like an insecure college student. Why don't you come up to me and be hospitable and be gracious to me and invite me to do something? And now as like a middle-aged guy with kids, I'm in church looking at the college students, and I think, why don't you cool college students come up to me and have a conversation and make me feel comfortable here? So we're all kind of doing this, and so take a risk, find someone in this church, and I almost guarantee if you find someone who's 30 years or more in age difference than you, that there'll be something to talk about that will help you see the world differently or learn. And even, take a risk and say, can we read a book together or something like that? Or maybe ask your staff to coordinate those sorts of opportunities. It's very, we don't do it enough. It's awkward, but I think the payoff could be huge.
How much should it matter if she doesn't like the person? In other words, like she picks somebody and she's 10 seconds in, she's like, I don't think I like you, but is there value in just, okay, let me press on,
I don't, maybe, or you can mitigate this though, like get a group, right? Say, well, let's the four of us together are going to try this. Okay. That's easier than the one-on-one that might go sideways.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was interesting when it was brought up about the long game, because obviously the majority of people in this group right here is not at the same long game as opposed to your students that you're interacting with at WashU. Question is, how do you help them understand, because every generation is a little bit different, their interpersonal skills with others seem to be diminishing. And how do you get them to engage in that and also be aware that it's hard to, truth can be sometimes very subjective when you get bombarded by the internet, Facebook, AI-generated stuff that has no soul, feeding what you want to hear, not what you should hear. How do you impart that onto the younger people to understand that?
Yeah, so a couple of things. First of all, I'll say, at least in my experience, and this is generalizable speaking all over the country, this challenge is as acute with older people as it is with younger people. So misinformation, entrenched echo chambers, diminished social skills. I mean, present company excluded, but I will tell you that around the country, it's as much, I see it across different age demographics. I think in an educational context, one of the things we can do is to practice and model more of what you're talking about. So I'll tell you, like the way law school works typically is you have these very large, I told you I have 92 students, very large first year classes, and the Socratic method is such that the teacher calls on a student and the student has a discussion with the teacher, and there's some use in that, maybe, but I tell my students, like, you will never, there's no situation in the practice of law where you're going to be in a room of 92 people and randomly called on. You might be before an appellate panel and peppered with questions, but you're going to be prepared for that moment, and that's 3 or 9, not 92. But what you are going to need is some social skills to talk to other people. And in a small group, so I do a lot in my classes, I have them break out into randomized groups of 5 or 6 pretty regularly. And I tell them, you're going to have to figure out, how are you value add to this conversation? How are you not dominating but also not saying nothing? And how can you discern and think of when your intervention is going to be useful to guide the conversation in a certain way? And then that skill will help you in the law firm, on the nonprofit board, in the church setting, in the neighborhood group. And there's I think a distinctive lawyer skill that actually, when done well, supercharges that ability. And that also works for undergraduates to get them talking in it's very hard to do this in large classes. And one of the great privileges about WashU is that we often teach small seminars. And when you get me 10 or 12 students who can't hide and whose conversation I'm going to force with each other, then really good things happen, and they work on all of the things you're talking about.
Well, thank you all for your, one more question and then we'll wrap up. We're going to have some refreshments afterwards, so we can continue conversation there.
Yeah, the question is, learning, how much does learning to disagree inform this space that we have with regard to interpersonal relationships, opinions that come out, they sort of put it a bit differently. To what extent does this inform the way we deal with biblical absolutes, like, for example, the Ten Commandments?
Can you, I'm not sure I caught the end of the question, so say more about the Ten Commandments?
Yes. To what extent does learning to disagree inform the way we deal with biblical absolutes, such as, for example,
Biblical absolutes, yeah. Yeah, so I think actually institutional context and leadership matters, and this is where churches, I'm assuming those of you who are members of this church have taken certain membership vows and made certain affirmations about what you believe and what you're committed to, and when you're clear on institutional purpose and context, you can set appropriate boundaries and saying this is what we are going to pursue together. And some of these boundaries it's not just kind of like how you feel on a Wednesday morning, but it's like this is what the LCMS church has said about this issue, and if you're going to be a member in good standing, this is what it means to get on board. Now, in a broader pluralistic society where a bunch of our neighbors and coworkers and friends come from very different religious or non-religious backgrounds that will reject most of the premises that you all hold or that we hold as Christians, I would say the thumb on the scale is persuasion over coercion, and the law is going to step in and sometimes coerce, but as Christians, we ought to be wary of that, and we ought to pursue persuasion when possible, and then realize that especially again in a very diverse and pluralistic society, we will be disappointed. We won't have things going our way in terms of power and law and politics, and that's okay because that was also true of, among other communities, the New Testament church. And I think one of the real challenges for American Christians is that it's very hard to us living in, I want to say, like the residue of Protestant mainline Christianity. It's a little more complex than that, but like basically for a long time in this country, at least the middle class was loosely Protestant of some kind, and then that changed over time. But coming out of that context, where some of you probably remember a time where you walked down the street and people could name the four Gospels or knew something about the history. That's not the case today. And the challenge then is, how do we go back and read the New Testament written by a group of people who were very clearly not in power, had no expectation of being in power, and were figuring out how to live faithfully and graciously with their neighbors in a world they didn't control. And I think that posture and that framework of even reading the Bible is the exegetical challenge for us today, individually and collectively. And the more that we can figure that out, the more we can address the kinds of questions you're asking.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, let's give them a round of applause. Thank you so much for your
Fantastic discussions. You guys can take a break. Well, again, there are questionnaires. Now, we're using a little bit different format tonight, sort of a question-answer sort of format. So we want your feedback on that and how that works for you in a learning capacity. And just a reminder that the first Thursday of May, we're going to be back with Jim Marriott, Reverend Dr. Jim Marriott, who is now head of the religion department at Concordia in Austin. and our worship arts team for a very lively evening of worship, of understanding the various forms of worship. I think it's been only probably 20, 25 years, at least within the Lutheran setting, that we have been doing what we're now calling contemporary worship. And we do it extraordinarily well here at Concordia and Webster Gardens and Kirkwood Press and a few other places, you know, in town, many other places in town. But there is still some controversy, even within our own church body, about contemporary versus traditional worship. And so we want to dig into that in a fun way, and I think Jim and Brendan and his team will be a great way to finish up this year. And then going into next year, starting next September, we're going to have much more of this setting of some of our WashU partners and our Concordia Seminary partners talking about various subjects that are controversial within our society and our culture. So after a good summer rest, I hope you'll keep an eye out for what's coming next year. And please fill out those questionnaires for us. All right, we want to go ahead and close with Luther's evening prayer. And if you'll join me, I thank you, my heavenly Father, through Jesus Christ, your dear Son, that you have graciously kept me this day. And I pray that you would forgive me all of my sins where I have done wrong, and graciously keep me this night. For into your hands I commend myself, my body and soul, and all things. Let your holy angel be with me, that the evil foe may have no power over me. Amen. So go in peace, serve the Lord. Thanks be to God. Please join us for refreshments in the back, and don't forget to drop off your questionnaires. By the way, access to Dr. Inazu's books are displayed in the back. You can check those out, and some of his great publications if you're interested in reading those. Thank you.